Comics and powered by the Red 5 Network. For more, visit red5.bio.link. Today we are diving into a massive new sci-fi series with author Nicholas Keating Casbarro, the creator of the Vitalerium series, a story that is set in 2701 that blends political intrigue, cosmic mystery, and some very real human questions about the future of the species. Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for my autographed goodies.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and thanks for having me, Danny.
Oh, of course. This is quite the read. Let me tell you something. This is very complex, very intricate. So you've said that the spark for Vitalerium came from a vivid dream during one of your many flights. Can you take us back to that moment and what you saw?
So the dreams are definitely play a part in it, but
Mhm.
like anything, it's never one thing that leads to something. Certainly, something as big as this. Um, I have. Are you familiar with sleep paralysis?
Yes.
All right, so I get that on a fairly regular basis, and
Mm.
that coupled with a few just really vivid recurring dreams that I've had.
Mm.
I wanted to figure out a way to work that into the story because I felt
Mhm.
like, if you write what you know, it's going to come off as, I guess, a little bit more real. And I
Mhm.
found a really interesting way to do that in the text by incorporating some dream sequences some very strange dream sequences that the protagonist is experiencing. Um, and yeah, all of them, typically have, I guess, a little bit of a sci-fi tilt to them in general.
Mhm.
I've been a sci-fi fan since I was a kid, so it made sense for me to write that, and then that coupled with, I was on a plane 3 to 5 days a week, and so I just decided to do something a little different when I ran out of things to watch on Netflix. So I gave it a shot, and I said, all right, well, where do we start? Well, let's start with, I've always wanted to hop on a spaceship and go explore the cosmos.
Mhm.
So, how do I create a future where that's possible? And that's where I started. So, I started with a history of how we became a multiplanetary spacefaring civilization. And it just snowballed from there.
Basically, what you're saying is the world came first, that universe came first, and those characters evolved later?
Yeah. The basis for the universe definitely came first. That first flight that I had where I started writing, it
Mhm.
was a flight from Miami to Hawaii, so that's like
Oh,
almost
that's a
12
long one.
12 hours, yeah. So I had plenty of time, and by the time I actually landed at my destination, I was finishing up chapter 4.
Oh.
So some of it was stuff that just kind of came out organically.
Mhm.
The the rest of what ended up happening came from the storyboarding that occurred after that, because I realized very quickly that, all right, I'm enjoying this. This is fun. And so I sat down on my computer, I started creating a little bit of a storyboard, and I started first with, what are the themes I want to write about? What do we want, kind of like underlying, what do we want the underlying tone to be
Right.
in this story? Because it's a far future kind of spacefaring epic.
Mhm.
Um, there's a lot of different things that I could dive into, and I certainly wanted to make sure that I remained focused on certain things, because even though, I mean, that book is, it's not a short read. It's like
No.
600 pages, but thankfully I've been told it does read fast, so that's
Mhm.
that's good news for the potential readers out there. But um, even with that amount of breadth for the first book, you can get lost in the weeds when you have multiple different characters. You can there's too many things to focus on when you're creating a society, basically. and what that looks like in the future. So I really honed in on those first. And then from there, I said, all right, well, if this is what's going on in society, well, who's fostering that? Who are the factions that are, kind of have a part in what's going on? Lots of political intrigue, like you said. So some of the factions are at odds with each other. Some of them are, reluctant allies. Some of them are just completely separate from everything else that's going on. For now, we'll say, but making sure that those were well defined, made sure that I had almost like a set of teams that people could identify in the book. This person
Mhm.
belongs to them. What is that faction like? And you can kind of get a feel for what that character might be like. And then I moved on to the characters. Let's talk about the characters. Every character in this book, and if you've read it, I'm sure there's a lot of them.
Mm.
Um, any character that had a speaking role at all, whether it was, whether they were a recurring character and they're in, 10 to 15 chapters, or whether they had 2 pages of dialogue, I wrote a backstory for them. Because if I define that person and I write the backstory and I understand who that person is, I can define their motives and I can build a personality around them.
Mhm.
And one that's going to feel real, one that's not going to feel contrived or just kind of shoved in. It's going to be a detailed, well-defined personality. And then from there, I defined every part of the universe that I could. Every question I answered brought about 5 more questions. So I just kept building and building and building. And I did that throughout basically the entire process of writing the first book. I still continue to do that today as I'm writing book 2. And I have 7 planned, so it's not going to stop anytime soon.
We were talking about, you did a lot of traveling, and your traveling was for your work in regenerative medicine, which is fascinating to me. Like, how did that lifestyle, the existing pretty much in airports, hospitals, hotels, the constant motion, like, how did that influence the scope of the universe?
So there are definitely some inspirations medically that I took from my own background, as well as, my wife is a surgeon as well.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, she's a badass. So anytime I started getting real into the weeds with anything medical, I could always have her to bounce things off of, like, hey,
Nice.
does this sound right? Is this plausible? Is that medically accurate? And so I had her as, actually, she was one of my first beta readers. And as far as the travel is concerned, um, the travel just became, I mean, the plane became my writing office, because as I continued to build upon, that kind of humble beginning of the story, I started realizing, like, all right, I'm enjoying this. I'm also someone who gets really into things. I guess you'd call that an addictive personality. I've definitely got
Mhm.
one of those, if that's the case. But I just said, all right, well, if you're going to take this seriously, let's take it seriously. So I just said, all right, I'm going to promise myself today, anytime I'm on a plane, anytime, I don't care how tired I am, how bad a day I've had, how good a day I've had, how many drinks I've had at the airport bar, doesn't matter. I'm going to write. And that's it. So almost the entire book was written at 36,000 feet.
Wow. Your medical background, your background in medical science and wound healing, uh, did working with burn patients and advanced biotech influence the ethics and or technology in Vitalerium?
It definitely the technology, definitely
Mhm.
some of the accidents and injuries that some of the characters experience throughout the
Mhm.
book. Um, I definitely had my own background to pull from on that, as well
Mhm.
as my wife's, I mentioned before. Um, yes, so there were a few technologies that I had actually kind of crafted based on kind of the ideal versions of what we're looking for today. And
Okay.
obviously, we're dealing with a time that's 700 years in the future, right? So obviously technology is going to be significantly advanced, and I'm extrapolating a lot.
Mhm.
but based on concepts of kind of best practice, what is required for certain types of wounds, injuries to be able to heal in a certain way. Those same concepts I carried over into kind of their most idealistic versions of technologies that maybe we're only cusping on today, but are fully formed in this day and age in the book.
So, absolutely grounded in real science.
Oh, yeah.
Great. I love that. I really do. I'm a huge fan of Star Trek, and that's one of their signatures is they always have a scientific consultant on set to make sure, is this physically possible? And they're like, I mean, theoretically.
Yeah. Theoretics. I mean, that's what we can deal with now. That's what we've got at our disposal, I guess. So, um, and I acknowledge that, I'm not a physicist. So again, we're dealing with a time that is very far from our own. Um, I admit I extrapolate a lot, but I also do my research. Like, so for instance, the technology around Vitalerium itself, which is in the book, Vitalerium is
Mhm,
it's an exotic material that's not native to Earth. It's unlike
mhm,
anything else that we have on our periodic table. It elicits some very unique properties. And it basically is what allows for, it's not only the fuel, but also the mode of achieving faster than light travel, FTL
mhm.
travel. So I based that on the Alcubierre drive, which is a concept created by physicist Miguel Alcubierre in the 90s. So he writes a
Mm.
paper in, I think it was 94, 93
Mhm.
or 94. Don't quote me on that. But
It was
it was in the
mid-90s, yeah.
90s, mid 90s, um, basically describing a workaround for the universal speed limit, which is the speed of light. Um, and he describes condensing space in front of you and elongating it behind you to be able to far surpass the speed of light. But he said to be able to do that, you would need some type of exotic material to create the negative mass. Um, there's also, I enjoy going down, YouTube rabbit holes and different,
Oh, me too.
conspiracy rabbit holes and things like that.
Mhm.
Have you ever heard of Element 115?
No.
So Element 115 is supposedly um, the exotic material that powers the crashed UFOs that are supposedly in, area 51 or at area
Is this
S4, all that
is
stuff.
this connected to Bob Lazar?
Yeah, he's the one who talked about it. Yeah.
I
And
have heard
so
about this.
and so I actually based Vitalarium on kind of a mix of both of these. One, the real science from Miguel Alcubierre, and two, the kind of conceptual stuff that Bob Lazar was talking about. And funny enough, there's a physicist out there now by the name of Harold White, I believe, who's talking about negative negative vacuum energy density as being that exotic material to achieve that type of travel. And
Oh,
that's in today's
wow.
theoretical physics. So
Yeah.
that's
Oh, that's
and
fascinating.
and funny enough, that I watched a presentation that he gave, and this was after I had created the concept of Vitalarium. This is far
Mhm,
after I'm basically finishing up book one at this point, and that came
mhm.
out, and I saw that, and I was like, oh yes, like a touch of validation, a little bit. So
Right?
that's all.
Love
So
it when
that's
that
always
happens.
cool. So yeah, but there's still, even despite the amount of time that we've been working with this material in the book, because the
Mhm.
book basically follows humanity's own timeline now
Yeah, yeah.
into the future. And the idea is that we discover Vitalarium sometime around 2080.
Mhm.
um, 700 years later, there is still so much that we do not know about it. There's so much we don't know about it. For
Yeah, they're like,
instance,
"Oh, this stuff is great. We don't know how it works, but it does a lot of stuff."
there's they definitely have an understanding of kind of the mode
Mhm,
of how we're able to achieve faster than light travel with the material. But like, for instance, we don't really know where it comes from. We don't know its
Right.
true source. And this is part of stuff that I don't even really include in the writing of the first book. We'll get into it more in future books. This is more kind of the lore that I have in the storyboard. But Vitalerium is basically expelled intermittently from this strange spatial anomaly that is unlike anything physics had ever planned for. So it's very strange. It looks like almost like a fracture in space time. And humans set
Oh.
up a mining operation around it to basically collect the Vitalerium that is expelled from this spatial anomaly. What I don't say is that they've sent manned probes in, unmanned probes. Nothing has ever returned. We don't know what's on the other side of this. The only thing that we know is that every so often, and we can track how frequently that happens based on by just measuring the anomaly itself and some of the signals that it's giving off when it's going to expel Vitalerium. That's it. That's all we know. And so there's a lot of other utilizations, some of which you kind of stumble across in the book, or your protagonist stumbles across it accidentally in the book. And then some of it I'm still formulating
Yeah.
for future uses in the rest of the series. So
Yeah. Well,
we've got a long way to go.
let's talk about your protagonist here. Who is Roman Matthews, and why is he such a compelling entry point into this universe?
Roman Matthews is a complicated character, to say
I'd
the
say
least.
so.
Yeah, yeah. So you meet him as kind of a young teenager first,
Mhm.
and you recognize that he has, kind of a good life. He's got a
Mhm.
normal life. He's got loving parents, and when tragedy strikes, you see kind of a downward spiral that turns into the person that he becomes for the majority of the book. So you get a glimpse into his backstory, kind of probably the deepest backstory dive out of any of the characters with Roman, and you see how this hardened individual is formed. Because when you meet him as an adult and you follow him through the majority of the book, he is they call him a freelancer, and
Mhm.
he's basically a mercenary. He's doing odd jobs for local gangs when you first meet him. Certainly a rough around the edges type character. He's a loner. He's a little bit of a drunk, kind of a lost soul. Um, Basically spending all of his money. He's basically doing jobs for gangs to spend all of his money on booze and whores,
Yeah.
just to forget his traumatic past. And so all of these good qualities that you see in him as kind of a younger kid, um, you then see are shelved. They're put on the back burner, and for what seems like quite some time. Um, he's definitely a man without a purpose when you first meet him, and that's very apparent in the way that he treats people, the way that he lives his life, and just about everything about him just kind of screams that. So in his work, he has a near-death experience, which ultimately embroils him in a massive conspiracy, and that has the totalitarian government of his planet hunting him.
Mhm.
And so it's a little bit of a rediscovery of purpose um, through circumstance, kind of the circumstances that he's thrust into you know, unwittingly. And by the time you get toward the end of the book, you start to see that kind of glimmer of purpose reignited in him again. It's not well defined, and I'd say one things that I've been criticized on with Roman is that he's too rough throughout the book. Throughout the book, I mean, even at the end, when he's kind of getting his feet about him,
Mhm.
um, he's still very much the freelancer that you meet at the beginning. He's just, with some softened edges and maybe a little bit of character development. But what I want to make clear is that, you know, the entirety of the book is supposed to happen over the course of a couple weeks. I don't care um, how heavily the events that you go through impress upon your being. No one does a complete 180 in, you know, 21 days or however
Right,
long it is. That
right.
it's give or take about a month or so that
And
the book timeline takes place. So
and and wouldn't you say that we could use some more roughneck dude characters in sci-fi stories these days? Like, I feel like they've kind of disappeared. Like, where are they at? It's almost refreshing to see this rough and tumble guy, just out there doing his thing, and all of a sudden kind of stumbles into this conspiracy with the Coalition of Prosperity, and now they're hunting him, but he's still this very much a roughneck, and it's just nice to see.
I I I I agree, and you know, I feel like a lot of sci-fi that I've seen lately has been kind of washed a little bit to make sure that it
Mm.
appeals to a larger audience.
Mhm.
And I think people, you know, we have short memories. We forget that, you know, what was the most popular series on TV for years and years running was what? Game of Thrones. And
Yes.
they were brutal in that
Yes.
show. That's it. That is something that, I mean, showing kind of the rougher side of humanity does have an appeal. Um, and I agree. I actually I saw your episode on Lobo.
You
So
did?
I know that you know that you definitely like those kind of characters. There, I feel like it's inherently interesting
Yes.
because the majority of us, we are, for the most part, living relatively, you know, so to speak, normal lives.
Mhm.
Um, and to be able to escape into kind of a wild adventure um, is it's gratifying in a way.
Mhm.
And to make sure that I was true to that, because I wanted to make sure if it's, I live by kind of the saying, if it's real, it reads. You know,
Yes.
I wanted it to feel real. I mean, you're following a gun for hire. He's basically, you
Mhm.
know, this guy's involved with gangs. He is a stone cold killer at different times throughout the book, or you get to see that he is that. There is kind of a glimmer of the person that could have been still there, and he does have some qualities in terms of leadership qualities, in terms of he does have kind of a weird moral compass at times that you get to see.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, he's not going to say, you know, gosh darn it. You
Yeah.
know, he's gonna
Oh,
he's
cheese and crackers.
yeah, exactly. He's gonna say, you know, fuck that. Yeah,
Right.
he's gonna be real. And so I
And
wanted to write him real.
we have forgotten, and I say we, I mean, I think pretty much the powers that be in Hollywood have forgotten that when you try to appeal to everyone, no one's going to end up liking it. You've spread it entirely too thin. And if you write honestly, if you write with honesty, people are going to respond to that entirely. That's the most important thing. Write honestly. So I absolutely commend you for that. It's good for you. That's what you should be doing, is writing with your honest heart. And that definitely comes through. You
Oh,
did.
thanks. I
You're welcome.
appreciate it.
So, speaking of this coalition of prosperity, and I really like that name, Coalition of Prosperity. Listen to us. Don't we sound friendly and helpful? We're here for you. They're chasing him across the galaxy now. What does this organization represent in terms of power structures and control?
So I took a few different inspirations, mostly from it's kind of like a combination of all the different superpowers on you know in modern day time. but
Mhm.
I throw in a little bit of kind of feudal royalty in
Mm.
there. Like for instance, the chief representatives, the ones who are supposed to be they're acting as the representatives of the people. They're not elected officials. They are, they typically either get their positions from the family that they're born into, or they're taken through power struggle. It's kind of it's a cutthroat position and a cutthroat type of government. Um, and they operate with impunity on the planet. And they have what is offset for a very long time on the planet the uh, the living conditions, and made them seem very prosperous for a long time, was the fact that this planet was basically established to run the Vitalerium trade, or to run the mining
Mm.
operation at the very least. And so they're kind of they're almost like they're very wealthy, but it is by chance by chance from the business that they run, because they're basically a puppet government that was installed by the IGB, which is they're the real rulers of kind of the known universe, the human colonized portion of the universe.
Mhm.
And
So I'm sorry, I'm so sorry to interrupt. It reminds me
yeah,
so much of like it's basically your Arrakis and the Landsrad.
yeah. So I Frank Herbert was probably one of my bigger inspirations. That's probably the first. Dune was the first real hard sci-fi that I read.
Me
I
too.
read that first book when I was like 13,
Mhm.
14. Um, there's a copy my father gave me. And that's when I really started getting like deeper into sci-fi, because I was like, this is
Dune
cool.
is
This is a whole
awesome.
nother world.
Yeah.
Um, and then I started getting into, in your high school curriculum, of course, there's your dystopian classics with like Orwell and Aldous Huxley, Brave New
Mhm.
World, 1984. Um, Started getting into that. So that definitely influenced my kind of dystopian slant on this society in the future.
Mhm.
Um, and then I started getting into Isaac Asimov.
Mhm.
Um, he basically coined the term robot. He was writing
Yes.
back in the 30s and 40s, and he wrote until he died. Um,
Mhm.
and I think he was massively talented. Um, Arthur C. Clarke, it goes on, but it's not just literature that I pull from. I pull from just about anywhere that I get that little kind of spark of inspiration from. I mean, I love film, so any sci-fi films out there, I love a good sci-fi flick. Video games, I play. I don't play
Mhm.
much now. I don't have the
Yeah.
time anymore, but I love a good sci-fi video game. I'm still of the mind that I think a sci-fi video game is one of the best ways to. It's one of the most immersive formats of storytelling, because you're not just along for the ride with those. You are actually making decisions. You're
Mhm.
involved in the
Mhm.
story itself, and I think that's really cool. So I'd love to see this as a video game one day down the line.
Oh, that would be neat. That would be super cool. This first book, The Descent in the Void, would you would you say it's primarily a political story, a philosophical one, or would you would you say it's action-driven survival?
I mean, I'd say it's all of those. I wanted to produce something that was a little balanced, where if you're following, it's multi-narrative, so you're following
Mhm.
multiple characters, and there are different storylines, and eventually all of those characters, they kind of intertwine throughout the book.
Mhm.
um, any historical event, there's a lot of different things that contribute to it, whether it's the economy, the political environment, the characters involved. And so you're going to get a little bit of that gritty street level view of the future, action packed and everything from Roman. you're going to follow a few politicians, and you're going to get the political intrigue as that government is beginning to fracture internally, for reasons that you'll have to read the book to find out. But you get a little bit of the philosophy as well, because when you mix politics and people, I mean, you can't help but look at the reasons why
Right.
people do the things they do, why things are unfolding the way they are. And so to basically give readers a full scope of the world building, I had to include all of these different elements. And so you do get a little bit of all of that. But the philosophy portion, I mean, that's the kind of stuff, those are the themes that I talked about. That's the first thing that I defined. What do I want to have commentary on? And you definitely get a little bit of that. And not just from the characters that are introduced throughout the book, but from some that you don't discover until the end of the book. I'm trying, it's funny. I consider myself still learning, because this is the first book I've ever written.
Yeah.
It's the first, when I started writing it, it was the first thing I had written other than a professional email in over a decade.
Oh,
But when you're enjoying something so much, the research work, the perfecting of the story, it doesn't feel like work. It's enjoyable. And I find, like, anytime I go to sit down at my computer and start writing, it could be at 11 p.m. at night after I woke up at 5 a.m. that day, I catch a second wind as I start working on this. It's the passion is kind of driving this a little bit.
Yeah, you want to know what's going to happen next. I find myself doing that. Like, I'm writing because I want to know what's going to happen next. Like, I'm so into it. Like, speaking of comics, you're adapting the universe into comics. How does visual storytelling change the way you approach the world and the action?
That's a good question. Once again, it was my first kind of shot at the apple, with the comic books, because I had never written, just like I had never written a book before. I finished the book and I said, all right, what else new can I add onto my plate? And I said, all right, well, the next logical step to bring kind of a pictorial version of this story to light would be comic books. And so I kind of went out there. I was seeking mentors and people who had done it before. And I ended up getting connected with my illustrator, whose name is Francisco Nilo. He's out of Argentina. He's fantastic.
Yes, he is.
And
Very good.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed them. He does an amazing job, and he's literally the one who taught me how to write a comic book script. He's like, this is how you frame it. This is what you need to describe. These are the elements that it has to have. He was giving me feedback like, hey, you're a little heavy on the dialogue in this area. Because remember, I'm adapting it from a long form book where it's all words,
Yeah.
And I need to make sure that I am leaving room for the artwork. And so there was a little bit of a learning curve at the beginning. And it's almost, I would describe it as even slightly more akin to writing a screenplay, because you're describing everything in each panel. And each panel is about a paragraph where I'm describing, okay, this is what this person is doing. This is the stance that he's in. This is the camera angle where you're basically seeing that person from. This is what he's wearing. This is the expression on his face. This is, what the dialogue will be between the characters, or, what have you. But a lot, cutting down the dialogue was probably the toughest part, while still maintaining the meat of the story and the meat of what's going on. And then everything else is kind of relayed through the images themselves, which, once again, I got to give hats off to both Francisco, my illustrator, and Chandran Panusamy, who's my colorist. at this point, we've worked together for 3 comic issues, and
Mhm.
it's like they're pulling it out of my head. They do an amazing job of bringing this dark universe. It's a dark story. It's not your cozy fireside romance by any means. Although there is a touch of romance in there.
Yeah,
I
if
I
if that's what you could call it.
well, in the comic books, at the very least, there's I don't know. I wouldn't call that romance either, but it's in there. Yeah.
You know, the comic, does it explore, like, do you have plans to explore any, like, side stories, or is it a direct adaptation?
Right now, what you're seeing is a direct adaptation in the first 3
Mhm,
episodes,
mhm,
except for the first half of comic issue 0. So the first
mhm,
comic that came out was 1, then 2, and then I
mhm,
went back and I described part of what wasn't described in the book, in the comic book. So you get to see actually the mission that he is on before he turns it in to his um, reluctant boss. We'll call it his
yeah.
uh, Tarly, in which you get to see in the book and in issue 1 of the comic. Um, but that is going to start a separate timeline, which is going to go backward chronologically, and that's going to cover all the stuff that I don't cover in the book, which is basically Roman Matthews going on missions for all different types of people throughout the city of Kyrus,
Oh, that's so
and
fun.
doing missions for sometimes small gangs, sometimes larger gangs, sometimes people who are more in the public eye, political officials who need something done, on the hush, um, prominent, people in society who need something a little clandestine done.
Mhm,
You're going to get to see a lot more of uh, Diorum, which is the planet that the story
mhm.
takes place on, through those comics, um, and a lot more characters as well. That's going to go backward chronologically. Anything following the book's narrative is going to move forward chronologically. And then I do have plans for some character offshoots that are going to dive into their backstory a little bit more and flesh that character out on the page a bit. That will
Mhm.
ultimately sync up with the main narrative. Um, and then I have an offshoot series that I'd like to do on the character Modus Magni.
Oh.
Uh, because the second I started writing his backstory, I was like, "Oh, this is a good character. Like, this is going to be a good story of its own."
I love it when that
And
happens.
he's very multifaceted, and the backstory that I wrote for him was just it was very intriguing, at least
Mhm.
to me, and those few who I've shared it with so far.
Yeah.
Um, so will that there may be in the near future a standalone book that comes kind of before the series starts based on him.
That's exciting. Do you see the comic versions as an opportunity to maybe improve upon what you've built with the prose versions?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, as I continue to produce the comics, the the goal is to really refine my vision for what that future looks like, um, in multiple parts of that planet, perhaps some other planets. In the story,
Mhm.
there are 7 colonized human planets, and in the first 2 books, the majority of the story is going to take place on Diorum. But after that, we're going to start to visit some of those places. We're going to see what society looks like on those planets. What's the government structure? What are those people like? And we're going to get to
Nice.
see how some of the
Very
other people
nice.
live on different planets.
You've built, what you said, a 7-book arc for the series? A 7-book arc. Did you map this entire saga out from the beginning, or was this something that just kinda evolved as you wrote?
It's definitely something that continues to evolve as I write. the first two books were mapped out, but that was also a relatively fluid process because as I wrote, I would find better ways to do things. Sometimes the characters would lead in a different direction, or I would see different opportunities based
Mhm.
on their interactions with the environment and with other characters that
Mhm.
weren't as apparent to me when I was doing kind of a top-down view. Um, so that continues to change even now as I'm writing book. I'm almost finished with book two. That's titled. I just did the title drop recently. That's Vitalerium, the bonds that break,
Ooh.
and that will be out this year. Um, but I have copious notes on how I would like the rest of the series to go. I don't have like a chapter breakdown like I have for the
Mhm.
first two books yet. That is slowly being formulated. Um, and I'll be able to do that once I get to that point, with the completion of book two. Um, there are, what I'd say is I try and keep it fluid to an extent. There are certain events and major things that are kind of outside of the character's control, at least the ones that are currently introduced. Um, and those will have, a profound effect on the characters that you have met. And then I know how the book ends because that's definitely tied into all of the themes that I kind of defined at the very beginning.
Mhm.
But how we get there is still kind of anyone's guess. So
Right.
the 7 book series, that is my best estimate based on the ground that I know I have to cover and what I'd like to include.
With such expansive lore, multiple factions, like, how do you keep all of this and the continuity straight? Like, how do you keep this all straight?
Microsoft Excel.
Same. Spreadsheets are so handy.
I keep it simple. It's, I come from a corporate environment. Spreadsheets are what I knew at that time. So I stuck with what I knew. That was the easiest thing for me to do rather than try and learn some type of new software or because you hear about all these different tools that some authors will use. And to be honest, everything that I need is kind of accomplished by just a couple of different tabs.
Right. I
I
use a
say a
spreadsheet
couple.
too.
It's a lot more than a couple.
I would s
Um,
I would imagine.
yeah.
If readers walk away from Vitalarium with one central idea about freedom, power, humanity, what do you hope it is?
Don't take anything at face value. Question everything. Do your research. For the most part, don't let it bog you down. Don't let it don't ruin your life over it. You still have to live, but just use your head. Try and find that ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, um, and say that because if you recognize some parallels in this book to today's times, good. That's what I wanted. But recognize someone may be reading that same thing and seeing it from a completely different angle. Um, yeah, the divide and conquer method is real, and I think we fight amongst ourselves too much when we have more in common than we think we do, in lieu of others who have, we'll say, other plans.
Absolutely. Nick, what is a question that you wish more interviewers would ask you about this book?
Well, shit, I don't know. Um, maybe, maybe questions about some of the other characters,
Yeah,
because the protagonist Roman comes up, undoubtedly in every interview. But
of course.
there are certain characters that have major roles in the book who are, I some of the characters are um, based on people that I know personally or have met that I've met and have inspired. a character, um, just because that interaction was so, you know, memorable. Um, it's never one person, despite the fact that you're following the man who you're basically following the origin story of a future mythological hero, and not just the songs that are sung after the fact. You get to see the gritty truth of the historical events playing out as they're happening. Um, but it's not just him. It's he's not the only one involved. As a matter of fact, without a lot of the other characters, he'd be nowhere. He'd be dead, more than likely, or still in his crappy apartment in the grind. Um, it's never one person that can bring something this large to fruition, but it does go at the same time to show how influential one person can become, and or the effect that one person can have on others.
Well, who is your favorite character?
My favorite character?
Mhm.
I don't know that I have a favorite. You know, when you're making these characters, you kind of become attached to all of them in some sense.
Mhm.
Um, so I definitely have that, even with characters that I, you know, tragically kill off in the book. But I definitely think Norval Mathis is an interesting character. He definitely adds um, a little bit of levity and kind of the know-how that allows Roman to get through a lot of different circumstances. Um, I like Modus a lot because, you know, I've already mentioned that, you know, with his
Yeah.
backstory. He is kind of a reluctant father figure to Roman in a way, um, because of obviously Roman's tragic backstory. But um, you know, Roman Modus never had a son, and Roman was extremely talented when he was working directly for Modus back in, and that's another time that I plan to cover a little bit more in the comics, because I really only allude to the backstory between the two, because there's a lot of
Mhm.
tension there. And so he is definitely an interesting character, and one that I was kind of proud of making. Um, there's the female character, Monique.
Mhm.
She's a firecracker, and she definitely helps to build his character, and I think is probably the main source of that rediscovery of purpose. Um, and I'm trying to think of who else. I mean, all of them really. I did write this one character called Nails in the book, who is like pure comic relief.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to make sure that I had a whiskey or two before I started writing with him, because the shit that I make him say is just, it is off the wall. Um, he was a very fun character to write, and a very interesting character, without a doubt. And he doesn't appear until a little later in the book, but he's a trip.
Nicholas, tell everyone where they can find Vitalerium into the Void. Descent into the Void. I'm so sorry.
You can find it anywhere. It's on Amazon. It's on barnesandnoble.com, booksamillion.com. If you like audiobooks more than physical books, you can find it on Amazon and Audible for the audiobook. And that's a graphic audio. I got a real voice actor. He does different voices for each character without making it cartoony. He adds music, sound effects, voice modulation, and post production. It's like you're listening to a movie. I wanted it to be a really immersive listening experience, and I really hope that's. I think my audio book, my voice actor, his name's Michael Neeb. He did a phenomenal job putting this together, and that was months of work between the two of us trying to bring that to fruition. Um, You can get the comic books on my website, which is vitaleriumseries.com, as well as any of the limited edition stuff. There's a limited edition book. There will be one for every single release. I typically only print 500 of those, and then that's it. They're gone. And I do the same thing with the comic books. There's a limited edition comic for each comic, and I only print 200 of each of those episodes.
Oh, wow. Very cool. Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us today and taking us across the stars.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's
No
a lot of
problem.
fun.
Yeah.
Disney and Kathleen Kennedy are gonna get you!